Now that the budget dust has settled, groups are trying to turn Albany's attention back to a variety of issues, including the Scaffold law. One group in particular that would like to see this law reformed says that it is specifically harmful to minority and women-owned construction businesses. They have a new upstate and downstate radio ad. Let's take a listen to the upstate version.
Governor Cuomo and the legislature have shown leadership in passing an on-time budget, making New York more business-friendly and bringing jobs back to our state. Property taxes capped, tax-free zones created, red tape eliminated.
Joining me now to discuss are Reverend Jacques DeGraff of 100 Black Men Incorporated and the president of the Associated General Contractors of New York State, Mike Elmendorf. Welcome back, both of you. Haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you both. Okay, we'll start with you, Reverend. I mean, that ad, and I just had time to play just the beginning of it, is very positive, the upstate version. It starts, as we just heard, praising everyone for getting an on-time budget, which I'm sure the governor's going to love, because that's his big focus, and then goes on to say, but there are more things that need to be done, including Scaffold. Was there ever a hope, I thought there was, that you would get this as part of the budget deal?
It was a wish and an aspiration. But we were always prepared and focused on that it had to happen this session.
Mm-hmm. And so now that you are trying to refocus everybody's attention onto this, you're also putting a bit of a squeeze on the caucus, which would be the Black and Latino members of the legislature. So you met with them today, and how did it go?
Well, we made progress. I think the reason we did that is because this bill has been introduced in some form or fashion for the last 20 years. And when you come down to the straight political equation, it's stuck in the assembly, and through work of Mike and others, it has moved in the Senate. But in the assembly, it's stuck, and everyone knows that the core of the speaker's support is with the caucus. So we went straight to the source today and presented our case.
So you're making, and you and I have spoken about this before, a civil rights case of this issue, and that's. The downstate version of this ad is very hard-hitting, and basically your argument is that the speaker takes care of his constituency, which is of course the conference, but also the Lower East Side, which is what he represents, and then it's time for the caucus to take care of theirs. What do you mean by that?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it quite that boldly, but it boils down to that. What we're basically saying is that everyone has, in the bottom line, some community that they stand with and stand for. And that those in our community need to stand up, those who we send need to stand up for us right now because it's an emergency. And then when we met today, there were those who didn't see the emergency, and so we had the opportunity to share information with them to clarify that. Some tried to delineate it and make it a worker versus owner issue. And we were very clear that in our minds that they're one, that the MWBE community are the ones who hire the majority of workers in our communities. This is not a union versus a non-union issue. This is it's not really a safety issue because nothing in the reforms that we're calling for would diminish the rights of workers. Okay,
Mike, you've been working on this issue for quite some time. As the Reverend mentioned, you've been able to move it through the Senate. Is this new tack, which is really this year that you've started doing this, working in your mind? I mean, are you seeing more movement on this?
I think there's no question that it's working and having an impact. The fact that we had the meeting today that we had, the fact that we're here together and united, not just the Reverend and I, but many, many different facets of our state, our communities, our economy, all united calling for reform of this law. You know, and the fact is we were up here in February. Reverend DeGraff was with us. We had a lobby day where we had people from all over New York talking about this, meeting with legislators. And the very next day, you saw the governor come out and say publicly that he'd be open to changing the law. I don't think that that's happened anytime recently. So we're making real progress. I think there's a broad understanding that, as the Reverend said, there's a crisis. The crisis is now, it used to just be about cost. Cost is a real problem still, but it's really now about availability. For contractors, upstate contractors, downstate contractors, union contractors, non-union contractors, minority and women-owned businesses, and, by the way, public agencies. We've talked about what's happening with the SCA. This is driving up costs for every public and private construction project in the state.
Okay, I just want to touch this issue because it's clearly there are opponents who say that this is about worker safety, that it's not about cost, and that's why we have to maintain the Scaffold law as we have it now. So what are you saying to those opponents to try and convince them, or to those elected officials who represent those opponents, to try and convince them that this is in fact not going to make workers less safe?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first one is, as the Reverend said before, what we're asking for is simply a comparative negligence standard. So a worker who is injured and a worker who was injured as a result of someone else's fault, either the owner of the project and or the contractor, would still be able to bring a case in court, present facts, and recover for damages that occurred to them, an economic loss. It would treat these cases the same way that every other type of personal injury or civil liability is treated, not just in New York, but around the country. The other issue is when you get down to brass tacks on safety. There was a study done recently by researchers from Cornell University and the University at Albany that actually said this actually creates incidents. It adds to incidents on job sites. It is not something that promotes safety. And if you had the law changed where a contractor and an owner's safety record mattered, they would be at a competitive advantage because their insurance costs would be lower. They'd be able to bid work for a lower price, which is how most work in the public and private sector is awarded, and it would actually be an incentive for a safer job site.
Our thrust and the theme of our whole reform effort is jobs, safety, and justice. And so it's important that we are as concerned as anyone about jobs and job protection and job safety. The safety aspect, in fact, one of the reforms that we call for expands safety requirements, expands certification under OSHA. So we're expanding the envelope, and when people get to hear our side of the story, they realize that we're not calling for repeal, we're not threatening any workers' rights. In fact, we expand the workers' rights. So we're very, very clear on that.
We talked last time you were here about a potential political price that people would pay, and that you left the door open to the possibility that there would be political ramifications if this didn't pass this year, in this election year. Are you still going down that path? Are you thinking in that manner, or you don't want to talk to them about that yet because you're still holding out hope that by the end of June you'll have some result?
I think reasonable people, responsible people find a way and make a way. But everyone is cognizant that actions have consequences, and so we don't reduce any of our options, as they don't reduce any of theirs, as they consider this legislation. It's a very serious issue. We're under an emergency. We need action in this session, and we will consider being a friend to those who stood with us and doing exercising our political option otherwise.
Before we came on the air, you mentioned the possibility that the failure to reform the scaffold law would actually have an impact even on a public project as large as the Tappan Zee.
Exactly. One of the things that people should be cognizant of is that throughout the state on major projects, and there's none bigger than the Tappan Zee or the 2nd Avenue Subway in New York and other major projects, that no agency, no project will be able to reach its minority and women-owned participation goals without a scaffold law reform, because those firms won't be able to compete.
Because
that you can, and somebody would say, you can go to the bank on that.
Because their insurance costs are too high? That's the issue?
Or
it's availability.
If it will be available at all. And the agencies that have programs, what we call opportunity programs, to have these firms have access to even participate, those programs will end.
So what happens if the Tappan Zee project can't hit its MWBE requirement?
Well, it's a goal. And so I think, that's something that the team that's doing the project and the Thruway Authority are going to have to work through. But I mean, even beyond the impact that it has on the MWBE contractors, and we see this all over the place, because whether you're a large multinational contractor or a small firm that's maybe even a subcontractor, getting insurance is difficult for everybody. I mean, the market is just crashing in New York. And so you hear on the other side, well, the insurance companies, they must be making lots of money, or they're up to something. If they were making lots of money, they'd be lining up to sell insurance to all of us for construction activity. They're not. But just on the Tappan Zee project alone, it's at least $100 million of additional cost for that project. We think probably more in the $200 million area that it added to the cost of insuring that one project. Now you look at the fact that there was a major controversy last year about the Thruway Authority trying to get an $86 million, I think, toll increase. That's $200 million that's been thrown off that bridge into the river because of this law. That same story is written out, large and small, on every public and private construction project in New York.
Okay, so the real issue here, though, I mean, to hear the governor say, I'm open to it, well, he's open to a lot of things, but he's not pushing for it. That's the real problem. I mean, is the governor willing to go to the mat? Because he can get the legislature to do a lot of things it doesn't want to do. And in this case, it's not the Senate, which has a divided situation, politically speaking, but it is the Assembly, and certainly he has a lot of sway there, too.
I think it's very clear that the governor and the administration understand that this is a major problem. It's a problem for the construction industry, to be sure. It's a problem for MWBEs. It's a problem for property taxpayers and local governments who bear higher costs. And it clearly aligns, I think, with virtually every one of his priorities in terms of what he's trying to do, rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding the economy, particularly upstate. They understand it. I'm not here to answer for anyone other than my
Understood.
association and
Understood.
our partnership, but I personally have confidence that the governor gets it, that his folks get it, and I think that they agree that there needs to be a change.
When you hear the governor's goals for business climate in New York State, and know that New York has always been a national model, and to see that New York is the only state that has this form of the law, I'm convinced that time is on our side, and this is the moment. They've been talking about it for 20 years. He's running for re-election. The legislators are paying closer attention, and I think we brought attention to this issue in a way that it hasn't occurred, with all due respect to the past. But now it's at a crisis level, and I don't think they want to walk away from this session with this unresolved.
Well, you've got a number of weeks left, right, until June, so we shall see. I thank you, Reverend. Until then, we'll talk to you again, Mike Elmendorf. Thank you. We do need to take another short break, but there is still more ahead on this Monday edition of Capitol Tonight, so stay with us.